Anyone who ever tried to talk to camera, to explain something to a microphone, would doff their cap to Sir David Attenborough. He's the most influential broadcaster of them all because he's a great teacher and a natural entertainer. With easy charm and elegant use of language, he's explained to us the planet we occupy. The art of entertaining while explaining, at the heart of all the best journalism and teaching, is easier to say than to achieve. All his life, in a career lasting 60 years and counting, David Attenborough has exemplified this principle with miraculous skill and stamina. He is unique, irreplaceable, without peer, and the inspiration to succeeding generations of broadcasters. If the world had any sense, he'd be a Nobel laureate. And if I had to give but one reason for believing that being an interviewer is a privileged occupation, it would be because it gave me the chance to meet and talk to this very remarkable man.
What in fact made you join the BBC?
Well, I was in publishing as a junior editorial assistant and dreaming up books about this, that and the other, but they took such an awful long time to come out. You know, you'd think of an idea and then it'd be 18 months before it happened, and I thought there must be a quicker way of doing this, and I saw an advertisement in the Times for a job in the BBC as a talks producer, actually in radio, and I applied for that job, which I didn't get, and then I got another letter saying, would I consider coming to television, because this was in 1952 when television was very small and quite a lot of people didn't bother to go to television.
You also did some interviewing, didn't you, to start
with? My first job, while I was trying to get out of publishing and into television, they rang up and they said, while you're waiting, we've got a programme and we're short of an interviewer. Would you like to be an interviewer? And I said, well, why not? and the first chap I had to interview was an athlete, a long-distance runner. And I'm sure he's a very nice bloke.
Gordon Perry.
Oh, I was going to be tactful.
No, careful. Because I've interviewed him too, and he's the most boring man in the world. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, he was a very great athlete, but that didn't make him a great talker.
No, he wasn't as good as all that, and I wasn't as good an interviewer as all that either. And, I mean, the trick in interviewing, isn't it, is that you don't give the leading question, isn't it? You're supposed to, you know.
That's right.
So, but this guy, I mean, he wouldn't say anything. So this is the first time I'd ever done this, and I said, you're an athlete, and do you have special training? Yeah. Well, I mean, anything particular? Well, it says here that you wear hobnail boots when you train. He said, yeah. So I said, well, why do you wear hobnail boots when you train? He said, because when I take them off, I go faster. Well, it wasn't very good. No. And I went home and my wife said, you were wonderful. But nobody else said I was wonderful. And I wasn't asked to do another interview for quite a long time. I was supposed to be a producer, you see.
There's a memo around, wasn't there, saying that you're
unfit? Years later, like 20 years later, when the producer of that particular programme was going to leave the staff of the BBC, I had the job of making a speech to say goodbye. And the tradition in the BBC is that you're sent the personal file, you know, you leaf through all the personal files, see if you can find something embarrassing. And I came across this memo. And it was said, David Attenborough is an intelligent young man, but he should not be used as an interviewer again. His teeth are too big.
What was it like making programmes in those days, in the sort of covered wagon days? And the Apaches roamed round Shepherd's Bush here.
Oh, I'll say. Well, I suppose the enormous thing was that it was live. That's the huge difference, not just talk shows. Every show, all the players were live, everything was live. There was hardly any film. And, of course, the equipment was incredibly primitive.
Natural history programmes, animal programmes, consisted of live animals, because everything was live.
Yes.
And there was the curator in the zoo who went round the cages and stuffed these poor animals in sacks and took them up to Alexandra Palace and then brought them out and put them on a doormat on a table and said, well, that's an armadillo and this is an anteater and so on. Of course, they didn't care for it very much. So they either bit him, which was quite good, or wet down his front, which was very good. And occasionally they used to escape, and which was best, really. And there would be keepers from the zoo on either side, ready to field it, like in the rugby, you know. But once there was a little thing called a flying squirrel, North American thing. And there were, instead of having these microphone things, they had booms, you know, that came on. And the chap from the zoo said, and now I'd like to show you this charming little fellow. There's a flying squirrel. And the flying squirrel went up there, went, and it jumped onto the boom, the microphone boom. So he said, oh, what about a bit of peanuts or anything? See, nothing good. And the flying squirrel shot along the boom, jumped into the lighting gantry. And so he said, well, what I show you now is an armadillo, you see. So we left the thing. But I knew, and indeed most viewers knew, that we only had 2 studios in the whole of the United Kingdom. And that squirrel was going to be in that studio, and it went into one of the ventilation ducts. So there was going to be another programme from that same studio the evening. And it was an epilogue, as a matter of fact. And there was a bishop in full... a kind of transvestite bishop, you know what I mean?
Well, they all are.
So he was there saying something pretty strong, and he had a Corinthian column at the back with a bit of grey velour, you know. Yes, exactly. And we all, I mean, those of us in the business, we suddenly saw there was the little flying squirrel at the top of that column, you see. And while he was going on, so dearly beloved, this thing was going tremendous. It was the best epilogue we ever had. And it went on appearing in various programmes, dramas, for weeks.
Somebody got the great idea that what you really wanted was natural jewels on television. I mean, people who had just come along and they weren't rehearsed, nobody told them what to do, you know. They would just tell the stories. And so I was made, as the most junior man around, in charge of natural jewels. Find the natural jewels and go into sparkle. Yes, true. And I looked around and found a rat catcher in the end, who was full of most marvellous stories about catching rats. And he was a natural, he was a natural jewel if ever I've seen one. Or heard one. There was only one thing wrong with his rat stories, and that was that they all ended in the most appalling way. I mean, the poor rat was cut in 2 with a sabre, or smashed to pulp with the back of a spade, and so on. But they were very good stories otherwise. So I said, look, Bill, would you come on and be a natural jewel? And he said he would. And I said, the thing is, you see, that if we won't rehearse you, we'll just come on and tell your stories, but when you come to the end, if you could just make it appear that the rat, as it were, went to sleep or passed away, you know, because we are a nation of animal lovers and people wouldn't like to hear them being smashed to pulp. So I said, so 10 minutes, really, not more, 10 minutes before the programme was due to start up at Alexandra Palace, he turned up and he had 2 large wire cages full of solid rat. I mean, churning around. I said, good Lord, Bill, what have you got those for? He said, well, you know, I want to see what I catch. See, so I said, do you have to? Yes, certainly, he said. So we took him up to the studio, and we put him in, and we were just about to go, and I said, now remember, Bill, you know, no cruelty, just, you know, nice going to sleep. He said, right, don't worry, he said. So I went up to the gallery, and cued music, and fade up camera 1, and Bill came on the screen, and he said, now I am a rat catcher. And I'd like to show you what it is I catch. See, and he produced this appalling thing of rat. And then he produced the other one, and he said, this one is Rattus norvegicus, a brown rat. And this one is Rattus, the black or sewer rat, and he's the one I'd like to show you first. And then to my horror, he got hold of the cage, lifted the lid, and plunged his hand into this mass of rats and got the biggest rat I've ever seen by the tail, whipped it out, slammed the lid shut, and started doing this. And while he was doing it, something went in his mind. He looked at the camera, he said, "I don't want you to suppose that I am in any way maltreating this man. But unless I get him slightly dizzy, the bastard will bite me."
What always fascinates me about a sort of modern explorer such as yourself is do you always get a friendly greeting from the natives? Or are they sometimes recalcitrant and hostile? They come brandishing clubs at you.
Oh, well, on one occasion they actually did.
Really?
Yes. It was some time ago now. It was in New Guinea. In New Guinea at that time, we were going into a central part which only about a couple of Europeans had been in before. It was a very big valley. And we had porters of 60 or 70 carrying all our food and stuff. And the way you handle porters in New Guinea is that they form a carrier line and you pay them so much a day and they start walking. And I was new in New Guinea at the time. I hadn't been there before. And we came to the top of a mountain pass and all the men put down their gear. And I thought they were going for a quick smoke. And understandable, top of the mountain pass, very cold, and had a hard morning's marching. And I said, "Well, now, come on, lads." See, and they said, "Gee, no good, you see." And I said, "Why not?" They said, "We no go along him." And why not? I said, him fairly stopped now, him no good, he kai man, that means they're cannibals down there. And I said, "Now, lads, if it's another sixpence a day you want, I mean, we can have a proper organised talk about this, And they said, no, you mean no good, him bad fella, you see." And while we were actually saying this, with me being very British about the whole thing, and I suddenly looked down the slope and I saw behind a tree a white cockatoo feather flash. And then I turned around again, and there behind a boulder was a glint of a knife. And I thought, and while I was in the process of thinking, see, suddenly, out onto the track, about 70 or 80 men suddenly jumped out of hiding and ran down towards us, brandishing spears and waving knives. And to say I was alarmed is to put it mildly. Charles Lagos, who was my companion at the time with the camera, had the presence of mind, he had got it in his hand, simply to turn it. So I know actually what happened. What actually happened was that I walked towards this screaming horde of men, and I actually heard myself, I stuck out my hand, and I heard myself say, "Good afternoon." And the marvellous, truthful thing was that they said, "Good afternoon." and what it was that we actually were arrived at the end of a tribal frontier, you see. And what always happened when people met on the frontier was that they all assumed their most warlike characters. Because if these new people had turned up and said, "Well, don't mind a shilling a day with the loads if it's all right with you," the people who brought us up there would say, "These lads are ready for a couple of, house burning, a bit of sort of pillage and one thing or another," and they would have moved in. So that whenever you met at the frontier, you always made this display. But apart from that, I've often been frightened, but I've never been in danger, no. I had a nasty time the other day. The other year, we were trying to record a scene with some Indian rhinoceroses. And the idea was, this was in Nepal, and we would be on elephants, on the backs of elephants, and the camera and the recordist would be on one, and then I would be on the other, and then we would go and find a rhino, and then they would take a shot of me saying, no doubt, with a bit of a whisper, "There's a rhinoceros." As if you wouldn't know. Anyway, well, we went for about 3 days. We were on a rather skittish female elephant. Hadn't seen a rhinoceros very much. And we went for 3 days and we didn't see any rhinoceroses at all. And on the 4th day, we caught sight of one. And when we caught sight of it, the elephant was so alarmed, she started bucking, and however, so the mahout sort of tapped her on the head and said, "Settle down." So the cameraman said, "Right, where you go?" And I suddenly realised that this thing and this radio mic transmitter, which I've got on my pocket here, which I had put underneath where I was sitting, had gone.
It'd fallen off. So I said to the director, "The microphone's gone. You can't hear what I said." And he said, "Well, find it." I said, it's dropped off. It's down in that grass somewhere. And they said, "Well, find it." I said, "I can't find it." "Well, it's a little thing like this. How will I find it with a rhinoceros standing over there?" And the recordist said, "Well, you've got the transmitter on it. It'll make a noise. Get off and call to it, and I'll tell you when you're getting warmer and when you're getting colder." It's true. So the elephant sits down, and I slide off the back, and the rhino's over there, about sort of 30 yards away, and I'm saying, "Hello, hello." And the recordist is saying, "Warmer, warmer, colder, colder." And finally, we got it. So I said, I've got it. He said, "Well, don't get back up, do it now." So I had to do this thing. Now, the shot's gone out, actually. It was in the series on plants. And there's... they said, if it charges, they said, climb up the tree. Well, if you see the shot, the tree, I swear, is not thicker than that. You know, I mean, lunatic. However, it was all right.
All this long and illustrious career that you've had, bringing these extraordinary creatures into our homes, you created, I think, the greatest piece of television. I would put in my top 3 or 4, is that wonderful encounter of you with the gorillas.
When I wrote the script, it came in a series called Life on Earth, and I wanted to show that it was very important in human beings to be able to have the thumb and forefinger, so you could oppose like that, because once you could do that, you could certainly strip trees of leaves, but also you could hold tools. So this was the key which led to the whole of human development, see. The opposable thumb. See, so I wrote this, and John said, I'd originally written it for chimps, and John said, "I think there's a chance we could get you with gorillas doing that." Because Diane Fossey, who, you know, became very famous, she had habituated these gorillas, and we could get close. So after about 3 or 4 days of crawling around in Rwanda, like these giant stinging nettles and mud and celery and all terrible, terrible time. Anyway, we eventually got close to these gorillas, and you could hear them. I mean, there they were, and I came round, and they were just up there. And John said, "Now go up and give us the stuff about the opposable thumb and forefinger." And I said, "Well, you know, you mean turn my back?" He said, "Yes." I said, "John, they're big, they're gorillas, you know." He said, No, it'll be all right, don't you worry, you know." So I crawled up, and I got quite close, when suddenly that big female you saw suddenly sort of loomed out of this very tall grass and sat alongside me, you see. And she went like that. And I thought, holy mackerel. Is this the moment to talk about the opposable And because I'm, you know, these things, I thought, no, it's not. So she then looked deep in my eyes and then sat back like that. So I sat back and I thought, what do I do next? When suddenly there was a weight on my feet. And that was the shot when those little things came. And they started undoing my shoes. See, so I thought, well, this is not the moment either. And this went on for, it seemed like 10 minutes. I mean, it was just miraculous. And I was in 7th heaven. And finally, the old girl got up and sort of, you know, strolled away, and her kids left. And I went back, sort of like though I was on cloud 9, as you can imagine. Yeah. And I went back to the crew, the camera crew, Dickie and Martin and John, the director. I said, God, wasn't that absolutely fantastic? And John said, but you didn't say anything about the thumb. I said, well, yeah, I know we had all this marvellous material. He said, well, we didn't really shoot any. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I didn't want to run out of film, you know. I thought we were going to go on about the thumb and forefinger. And it was only after it'd been there for about 10 minutes that Martin, the cameraman, said, look, why don't we take just a few shots of what's going on? You know, it'll make the boys in the cutting room laugh.
So,
and that's how, so we didn't get it at all.
Is there any animal you're frightened of?
Well, I hate rats, I have to say.
Rats?
Yes, I do hate rats. And the reason the reason rats don't appeal to me is that the rats invade our living space, don't they?
Yes,
I mean, that's what's... As long as they're out there, it doesn't matter whether they're tigers or whatever they are, that's fine. But I was in India a year or so ago, and I was on the loo, and a rat appeared from between my thighs.
Oh, God.
You know, I thought, no...
I hate when that happens.
They're a marvellous thing to be able to turn on your television. And in between all these road accidents and wars and politicians and advertisements and nonsenses and odiousness, suddenly you see something which is amazing, very often extremely beautiful, unpredictable, full of drama, and above all, it's true. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, no one's codding anybody. This is actually reality. There's nobody making it up, nobody varnishing it. This is what goes on. These other things have life. The one thing that we share with them, this mysterious thing that nobody can identify, we simply don't know what it means, we don't know where it comes from, but they have it and you have it.
You've never lost, as I said in my introduction, your sense of wonder about this, have you?
No, I don't think anybody does, really.
You don't?
No, if you've never seen a butterfly crawl out of a chrysalis, if you've never seen a chrysalis split, and a butterfly, or a dragonfly, perhaps even commoner, crawl up a reed, stretch out these wings, pumping a liquid in so that the wings stretch, and then sit there in the sunshine with just a faint tremble while it dries. I don't believe there's anybody who can watch that happen and not think it's pretty marvellous. What is fascinating about animals is to see how a centipede, a spider, a frog, a bat, a whale, and you are all faced with the same problems. How to find a mate, how to find food, how to raise the kids. I mean, we all have those problems. And what is marvellous about natural history is what you see is that there is an infinite number of different ways of solving those problems. That's what makes natural history fascinating.
Let's consider the other problem too, which is the habitat, which is being destroyed, the rainforests and things like that. Explain to us just, I mean, we all know that it's a bad thing, but why is it a bad thing? I mean, what happens when you destroy an acre of a rainforest?
Well, there are two levels, really. The first is a selfish level. Rainforests are a key factor in the Earth's climate. An enormous amount of water vapor comes up from the Amazonian rainforest, for example. And that is key in the climate which we have known and become accustomed to and have lived in for generations. If you destroy that, you will disrupt that and you will get huge claims of climate. There will be more extreme climates, very difficult to predict, heaven knows, but that will be certainly one of the things.
Yes.
But the second thing is that forest had a peculiar kind of ecosystem. Unlike a European forest, all the fertility is in the forest itself. The land itself is quite poor. And so what you will actually do when you cut it down, if you cut it down, A, for the timber, or B, in order to grow oil palms or something like that, that will only last a short period and you will be left with a desert. Now that's a gross extravagance and waste of the Earth's resources. And finally there's one more thing which is perhaps more difficult to talk about, but it is a moral thing. The planet we assume belongs to us. It does not. There is a vast number of species on this planet. We share it with them. We are, it is true, dependent upon many of them for our health and for our wealth. But actually it belongs to them too, and they too have a right to live.